The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path. A path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Tonight's episode is Unbiased News.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Created in the Image of God. I'm your host, Wade Franson. When I saw that title come up, Unbiased News, I suddenly had an epiphany, right? Because Jesus came and brought the gospel, right? Gospel means good news, good news. And, today, all the news is bad, right? There's bad news everywhere constantly. But part of the reason for that is that bad news sells and bad news creates echo chambers. And bad news is really good when you can blame the bad news on the other side. This is a problem in our society. And we need to get back to, God gave us minds to think and to see clearly, and a spirit that allows us to sort through and to discern. So we have a very special guest tonight. His name is Isaac Saul. He's involved in journalism, and we have been talking about this both on the Sunday show and the Tuesday night show with various people. We had David French on here from the New York Times talking about how to cultivate media literacy. Well, Isaac Saul has done something about it. He's the founder of Tangle, and Tangle takes a unique approach to bringing news to us in a way that we're kind of forced to look at both sides of the issue. So let's welcome Isaac Saul into the studio.
Hey, Wade, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I've really been enjoying chatting with you backstage leading up to the show and getting reacquainted. We hadn't talked in a month or so, and there's some news that's happened, which we'll get into here in a little while. But first, as we always do, we want to get to know the real you, the unbiased you, the you that was being formed and shaped without even your own conscious thought. As a little child, what were the circumstances of your birth? What was the world that you were born into, the environment that allowed you to grow and become who you are now today as an adult?
Wow. I like you start with a small question, huh? I was born in Trenton, New Jersey in the early 1990s. So I got dropped into a family that was kind of transitioning out of like a lower middle class life to a decidedly middle class life. The first 5 or 6 years I was alive, we were kind of in a poor neighborhood in Trenton, and definitely like a working class, lower income. And my dad was working sort of on the front edge of a lot of computer science technology. He owned his own computer sales company for a little bit. He was selling computer processing equipment before like the big dogs, Microsoft, Apple, everybody came in and ate them. And we kind of, got out of that lower middle class income bracket. And I eventually moved across the river into Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which for those who follow politics closely probably know is a bellwether county in a bellwether state. It is a socioeconomically very diverse place. Not very racially diverse, but a lot of class diversity, and a really middle class kind of like, Philadelphia suburb. And so I grew up in an area where people broke bread together who didn't share the same political beliefs, which feels foreign and non-existent in today's America. But, where I lived and where I went to elementary and middle school and high school, CNN would descend on our town during elections. to try and interview people at the diner and get a sense of whether the Republican or Democrat was going to win, because it was such a politically divided place that wherever Bucks County went, Pennsylvania often went. And so, I sort of got to see what that was like and witness what that was like and have very vivid memories of what that was like. And when I went to college at the University of Pittsburgh, which is in Western Pennsylvania, I was similarly in a kind of working class, politically diverse area, a state school, not, in my view, not ideologically captured like some other universities are or have been criticized for being. And again, had opportunities to interact with and work alongside people from really different political backgrounds. And I worked for the school newspaper, and I got into journalism, and I ended up kind of entering the media space as like a young, hungry reporter. And when I got there, I realized that there were things that were really fundamentally broken about it. Primarily that the industry was dominated by people of a particular political background, A, and B, that the news was being produced in a way to attract specific segments of the voting population. So, my first job ever was at the Huffington Post, which, as you probably know, has a strong reputation for being a left wing news outlet. And I'm fond of telling people, I didn't take the job there because I was a liberal hack. I took it because I applied to 40 jobs and I got one of them, and it was at the Huffington Post. And we were writing for a specific audience, for liberals. And they didn't care that conservatives weren't reading our work. They weren't speaking to them. I cared, and I felt like that was a really broken and backward, business model. It didn't make sense to me. I wanted my friends and family from home to be reading my work, but they didn't trust it because it was published in Huffington Post, and they recognized that was a left-wing newspaper, left-wing, news outlet. And so I realized that like we were really bifurcated, and this was in 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015. And at the time, the idea of like a social media bubble or being, insulated, it was relatively new. Facebook was really just becoming the powerhouse social media network it is today. That was kind of a new concept that people were living in their own bubbles. And I saw it really clearly. And as I sort of spent more and more time in the media space, I wanted to fix it. I wanted to build a big tent media organization, a place where people of all political backgrounds could come, be seen, heard, feel like their views were being respected and represented, and also encounter a bunch of views that they didn't like so they could learn from them and grapple with them. And that's why I built Tangle and was sort of the North Star for launching this media outlet.
Well, that's an awesome summary synopsis of where you started and how you got to where you're at. I want to go back a little bit and touch on a couple of those things. First of all, in that town, and I forget the exact name of the Bellwether,
Bucks
New
County,
Jersey,
Pennsylvania. Yeah.
Pennsylvania, Bucks County. Okay, so when you look back on that time and that experience, what was your reaction to it? Did you enjoy that? Did it appeal to you naturally? Is that what kind of gave you the bug to go do something like this?
Yeah, I would say my friends, I think, would say that I have a reputation for being a little bit argumentative and a bit of a trash talker. And I enjoy like a good discourse and a good ribbing and a good back and forth, and I loved it. I mean, I love that I had friends who saw the world differently than I did. I loved arguing with them. I love that we could, my memories as I was becoming like a young adult, 16, 17, 18, of like, my dad, who's a dyed in the wool Democrat, being really friendly with, a neighbor who's like a hardcore Bush supporting Republican ex-military guy, and they would have beers together and talk, and they could relate to each other. And they disagreed and they'd argue, but they were friendly too, and they would care for each other and look out for each other. And I just feel like we lost a little bit of that somewhere along the way. Like the political identity has become a kind of religious war. It's just different. It feels different. The stakes feel different, and it's harder to bridge that. So yeah, back then, I don't know. I'm the youngest of 3 boys, so I think I was just loud and wanted attention, and was comfortable in the kinds of situations where people might be disagreeing or being disagreeable, and it didn't scare me. And I love that environment. I love growing up there. I'm really grateful I grew up there. It definitely shaped my worldview, and I think I am much more empathetic and understanding of people, regardless of their political views, because of that upbringing. So, it's hard to know exactly why it worked for me. I'm sure for some people it didn't. But I've managed to maintain a lot of really, really strong relationships with people through all the turbulent times, which I'm really proud of. If you can't do it in your personal life, you probably can't do it in your professional life. So that part's important to me for sure.
So are you familiar with that song by Billy Joel, Allentown?
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So Allentown, that's Pennsylvania, right? So how far
Yep.
was that from where you're at?
Not far. The next county over, actually.
Okay. So in that song, there's a lyric, every kid had a pretty good shot to get at least as far as his old man got. But something happened on the way to that place. They threw an American flag in our face. I know that's what he said because I could never figure out they threw a what in our face. They threw a numeral something in our face. No, American flag in our face is the lyric, right? And so, you know, he's getting at a similar slice. That's not political. That's just economics, right? And the American dream. But I think they're tied together. I think that there used to be a common patriotism. And one of the things that's changed is it's not about, who's going to run the economy for the next 4 years, right? It's who owns the soul of the nation, right? And are we a shining city on a hill, or are we a blight on the planet, right? And there's two different views and visions of what America is, what America should be. Our very identity seems to be at stake, in this new situation versus what it might have been 50 years ago. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, first of all, I do think the stakes are real. I think the political parties, as they exist today, are the 2 major political tribes: the Reds and the Blues, Democrats and Republicans, whatever you want to call them. I mean, it changes all the time, but I think they have differing enough visions for the future and real differences. It's like there's sort of a trope in some media coverage where people like to say either they're, the 2 duopoly parties are the same, or they actually agree on a lot more than you think. I don't think that's true, actually. I think that the 2 major political tribes we have are different from each other, and they have different visions for what they want the country to be. And so I think those stakes are real. I think what has changed, in my view, actually, and I'd almost be interested in your perspective on this too, given the context of your show and what you do. But, I think 30, 40, 50 years ago, people had community in their church or their synagogue or their mosque. People had community with their block, the neighborhood that they grew up in, maybe their union or their community center. We don't really have that to the same degree that we used to. And I think today a lot of people find their community in their politics. And the idea that, you're no longer practicing a set of beliefs, but you're now practicing a personal identity, one that's akin to, a religious view. That's a really powerful drug. I think it blinds people, frankly, to, the, hypocrisies of their own team. It forces people to conform often when they shouldn't conform. Like if you're taking principled stances and the people you support are violating those principles, you shouldn't conform to what they've done. You should object and hold to your principles. But I think people often conform. I think those kinds of things have sort of snowballed and pushed us further and further into our corners in a lot of respects. And so it makes the differences that the two major political parties have feel so existential and feel so dangerous to both sides. Something that I've realized, especially recently, in the last few months in particular, because of some of the political violence that we've seen, is that everybody's just really scared. There's so much fear out there, which, again, it's not new, but I think the kind of level that we're at right now feels new to me. Like the left is really, really scared that Trump is some sort of authoritarian fascist leader who's going to try and take over the government and won't leave office in 2028. Like they really fear this. And the right is really scared that, the left is going to shoot them in the head for having disagreeable political views if they espouse them publicly, and that there's not enough people on the left who are willing to condemn political violence. And, that there's like a sense that it's not safe to be conservative in our country right now. And it's like those fears are real, and they they push people really far away.
The fears are real. The fears may not be warranted, but the fear is real. The fear
Absolutely, yeah,
is real, whether it's warranted or not.
And we have to deal with that. I mean, that's, right. I actually think the fact that fear is real is almost less. You can't talk somebody out of it in right. the beginning. You have to accept that that's the place that they're coming from. And a lot of millions and millions and millions of people are there right now. And I think that makes it all feel very existential too.
Well, I'm going to get back to this question about religion because it's a fascinating one. But on this topic of fear, remember a few years ago, there was the term fear porn. We actually don't hear about fear porn very much anymore. And I think that's because the fear porn has so completely done its work already that you don't even, now it's just status quo. And I remember like the image of a TV, like puking out dark fear, right? And this was, pre-pandemic. But after the pandemic and the stolen election and the insurrection and all this, constant fear and hyperbole, and it's not just hyperbole, it's like beyond belief exaggeration. You follow me?
Yeah.
And everything is a threat to democracy from both sides. And people are now living, to your point, I know somebody who's an immigrant who has a green card, and she's literally terrified to go outside because she thinks she's going to be snatched somehow. And to me, it's just the most ridiculous thing. But that fear is very real, as you said.
Yeah, and I think there's a lack of information resources, and there's a lack of players in the information ecosystem that I think are willing to say, this doesn't have to be a 5-alarm fire. This story is not as dangerous or, threatening to you personally as it might seem, because most of the media and many of the news organizations that dominate, and also frankly a lot of the independent media, the influencers, the personalities, they thrive on the fear. I mean, they need it in order to get clicks and page views and advertising dollars and subscribers. And so there isn't a lot of incentive to turn the volume down. They have to turn it up. They have to find the next thing to keep people's eyeballs there and to keep people interested, especially because of what you're saying, that like, I think an astute observation that even just 5 years ago, we were so aware of the kind of fear porn. We were so aware of the way like certain stories were being pushed on us in a way that was very obviously meant to evoke maximum fear and emotion. And now it's like we just swim in it. It's so ubiquitous that you don't even notice it. It's just like that's how it is. That's the world we live in, and it's everywhere. And nobody's really turning the volume down. I mean, we certainly, I think, try to do that and bring a lot of rationality and level-headedness to our reporting and to the news. But scouring the landscape, I would say a lot of people are not doing that right now.
Yeah, well, we're going to go to our first commercial break, which is a little video about you to bring people up to speed with who you really are and what you're really doing and what is this Tangle thing. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back with more of Isaac Saul, the founder, editor-in-chief,
Both.
cook and bottle washer of Tangle. Be right back.
This video and stick around for what's the
You know, that worked just fine when we were not live.
That's how it goes.
Normally we have the video. Normally have the video in the studio. So do your own little 1-minute pitch on Tangle. What is Tangle?
Yeah, sure. So we have a really simple North Star, which is viewpoint diversity. Every day we cover one big debate in the political world. So, what's the big topic everybody's talking about? For instance, today we covered the conversion therapy case that went before the Supreme Court. And then we share arguments from the right and arguments from the left. And then someone from our staff shares their own My Take, which is like a little mini editorial where we try and call some balls of strikes and maybe, take a particular stance occasionally, depending on whether the person on our team feels really strongly about the issue that we're writing about. And this idea is basically that we're going to put a bunch of views in front of people and let them make up their own minds. And a lot of people in this country are really, really hungry for that right now. Just this simple concept of like, here's 3 arguments from the right, here's 3 arguments from the left. Some of them are kind of more centrist arguments. Some are fringe, maybe far left or far right. But you're going to read our whole newsletter or listen to the whole podcast. And at the end of it, you'll have a really good understanding of what people from across the political spectrum are saying and thinking about this topic. And then you get to grapple with it on your own. And we trust you to make up your own mind and think for yourself a little bit. And it's shocking how few places do this, offer genuine viewpoint diversity. And it's also shocking how many people are out there who are craving this kind of media. I was skeptical when I started this, to be totally frank. I was, we were doing the opposite of what everybody else was doing. Everybody's running towards the partisan media, picking a team, fight for your team, put those messages forward. It's a really good way to grow your audience and to get traction and subscribers and advertising dollars. And I had this idea that, the proposition for people is you're going to have to read views that you like and views that you don't like. And how many people are going to tolerate that? And I really didn't know if there was a big enough audience out there to make it work, but it turns out there really is, which has restored my faith, honestly, in a lot of ways about the country. And we have a really big audience now, 450,000 people on our mailing list, a podcast that gets 500,000 downloads a month and a YouTube channel. And we're building this community that I think is really powerful and is making people better thinkers and better American citizens and smarter. And I'm really proud of it. And I hope we can keep it alive for a few more years at least.
Well, I think we just talked in the studio. You started about the same time Barry Weiss left the New York Times. Or no, she was with the where was she with again? The New
She was
York
with the
Times,
New
right?
York Times. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would consider her largely liberal, but she was too conservative for them, especially on certain issues,
Yeah.
right? Like anti-Semitism, I believe, was one of the main things. And she was just her company was just bought, the Free Press. Her company was just bought for $150 million, and she was also installed as the editor in chief of CBS,
Mhm.
something like that.
Yep.
So obviously, your model has legs, and you're doing well. You're following in some great footsteps. And again, you started at about the same time. Not that you're following in her footsteps, but she jumped into it from a more prominent position. Let's say, maybe got more immediate traction. But so the future in that sense kind of looks bright. But I would also ask, CBS obviously is making a play here, a play maybe for credibility. There are a couple of comments in the chat. We won't go there just yet about how to restore credibility for the news. Well, is that what CBS is doing when they, hired her?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things at play, candidly. I mean, first of all, let me say I have a tremendous amount of respect for Barry and for the Free Press. I'm a subscriber. I'm a fan. They anger me sometimes, and other times I read stuff and I'm like, this is the best piece I've ever read, and that's I think how it should be as a news consumer. Certainly, what we're trying to do at Tangle. So I respect what they built a lot. They're definitely a model for us. I think CBS is doing a few things. First of all, I think they understand that they've lost a lot of conservatives, candidly. And while I agree with you, your assessment about Barry's politics or personal politics, I think the Free Press codes a little bit more center and center right to people. So bringing in someone like her and those kinds of contributors, I think they are hoping will attract an audience that maybe has abandoned them and no longer trusts them. Um, to be very candid, I also think the new owners of CBS probably really like Barry because of some of her viewpoints, about the war in Gaza, about Israel more broadly, the kind of center right positions that the Free Press has staked out editorially. I mean, there was an ownership change at CBS, and they haven't been shy about the fact that, those new owners have particular sort of center right views on a lot of stuff, and they want to reshape this institution of American culture, which CBS is. It's still a really powerful television network that millions of people watch every week. And so I think she fits the bill for that too. But I suspect that she's going to do a really good job. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who hate on her, and there's a lot of people who sort of armchair quarterback stuff, but the truth is CBS could use some ideological diversity in its newsroom, and Barry offers that from the top down, and she'll bring in people who offer that, and that'll be a really good thing for their news coverage. And there should be friction in these newsrooms. We have a team of 12 people at Tangle. We have different politics on our team. We fight and argue all the time. I think that's healthy. I think it's part of what happens in a pluralistic society where people who come from different backgrounds and have different views are trying to live together. And there probably should be some more friction there. So I hope she brings that, and I'm excited to see what they do. And yeah, I think it's a great signal for independent media operators like me that there's a lot of people out there who value the work that we're doing.
Yeah, I'm also a big fan of hers. I hope I didn't come across any differently. Just she's really interesting. So let's get back to then this topic of religion, and maybe we can sort of role play even or pretend that this is a Tangle news discussion, right? If I were on your staff or whatever. So somebody posted something and tagged me in it on Facebook, right? Because of my views on religion, and I tend to have strong opinions on things. I don't push them. I believe religion must inspire, not coerce. I resigned from the ministry to separate my faith from my paycheck. I believe that God gave us free will and that he doesn't coerce any of us. That's why we have the situation we have. He sends rain on the just and the unjust alike, he says, and he gets to decide who's just and who's unjust. In fact, the work of the devil is to accuse the brethren. So if you're pointing fingers, we all know the story. You point your fingers, there's three pointing back at you. They always say that, They used to say it. You point your finger, there's three pointing back at you, right? So don't point your finger at people, right? Talk about ideas, talk about policies, talk about outcomes, situations. Don't point your finger at what they might or might not have in their heart. You don't know. And it's not your business. That's God's business to judge that. Having said all that, somebody posted this cartoon of God pictured in a bubble like a divine king with a hat on, kind of like an image of Nebuchadnezzar or something, but God in heaven saying, you shall treat the foreigner the same as the citizen. And then there's a woman with a MAGA hat on saying, but what if they are, and she doesn't get to finish her sentence. God says, did I stutter? And the obvious implication is that, one side of this issue on immigration is completely wrong, and God would back them up because they're not treating immigrants fairly in the same way we are. And they pointed this at me, right? Like, what are you going to say about this? Haha. And I just went to the scripture, and the actual quote, and maybe there is a quote that has that exact wording, but the actual quote is, there shall be one law for the foreigner and the citizen. And it's in the context of taking the Passover. I mean, you're Jewish background, so you know what the Passover is, right? And what the Passover symbolizes for Christians is, the lamb being slaughtered, Jesus. So this is an important thing. And in Israel, in order to take the Passover, you had to be circumcised. So what it's actually saying is, if you want to be a citizen of Israel, you have to submit not to some registration process, right? Not to some legal proceeding at the border. No, you have to submit to something incredibly personal and incredibly painful, circumcision, in order to be counted as a citizen and therefore be subject to the law. So I just posted that quote and I said, isn't it funny how this kind of works better the other way?
Yeah.
Right? So if this were a Tangle editorial on immigration, right? Quoting really the same source and interpreting it differently.
Yeah, I mean, well, I would say a couple of things. First of all, if this were a Tangle editorial or a Tangle newsletter, we would allow people to look at that exchange and judge for themselves fundamentally. So I think, like, again, the important thing for us is that the cartoon doesn't get to stand on its own and your comment doesn't get to stand on its own, but they get to speak to each other and you get to look at them and evaluate whether you think, whose argument is better, whose argument is more compelling or stronger to you. I have, very deep and complicated thoughts about how to fix our immigration system and a lot of the problems that exist. I've actually owned property on the border in West Texas. I have family who grew up on the Mexican side of the border. It's a really, really complicated, difficult issue, and I've spent a lot of time there reporting on it. And here's what I would say. I actually think having order on the border and enforcing the law is a really humane thing to do. My perspective, broadly speaking, is that we are a country of great wealth and a lot of people want to live here and we have a ton to offer. And we should take in refugees. We should take in asylum seekers. We should, be a kind of beacon of hope and a place that the downtrodden can find security in, especially the people who are fleeing oppression in horrible places under horrible regimes across the world. But the only way to do that in like an orderly fashion that sort of maintains the kind of social order and cohesion that makes America such a great place to be is to actually have order and enforce the law. If there's hundreds of thousands of people arriving every month at the border illegally or crossing illegally, they are clumped in and obscuring a smaller portion of people who are genuine asylum seekers and refugees who want to be here and are trying to come here and, turn themselves in and have their asylum case heard. And it doesn't get heard because there's 3 million people in front of them in a backlog because tons of people cross the border illegally because our system's broken. So I respect the left's, like my Tangle hat, putting my Tangle hat on, what I would say is like, I respect the heart of the left's message on this issue, which I do think for a lot of normal, maybe not the politicians or the corporate interests who want labor or, whatever, you can be skeptical about this. But I think like your normal, like my liberal friends, they see, people from Guatemala who's traveled 2,000 miles to get to the border and they're barefoot and they're holding babies and they're hungry and they're dirty and they just like want to come here and have security or work or whatever. And they say, why aren't we letting those people in? We should help them. And I respect that a great deal. And I think that's a good inclination to have. I just also respect the conservative perspective, which is like, if you want us to take those people in and help them assimilate and, live here and have fruitful lives here, they can't come with 100,000 other people in a week. We need order. We need to be able to process them, and we need to be able to afford it as a society and all those things. So you have to kind of find a way to balance that. That's how I would approach that issue. But that is a funny interaction. That sounds like Facebook to me. People throwing pot shots from the rafters. I know what it's like. So I appreciate you handling it with, go to the source and tell them what it actually says. That's a good way to navigate it.
Yeah, and I did it sort of tongue in cheek, just it's funny how it. But anyway, so let me share a little bit of my personal story. As an 8-year-old, my parents divorced. My audience knows pieces of this story. My father came and my mother was given full custody because that's what happened always, right? Almost always. My father came and told the babysitter he was taking me and my 2 sisters to the mall, just didn't tell the babysitter the mall was in Sweden. Now, I was born in Canada.
Whoa.
My father was born in Sweden. My mother was born of English parents. So you got this citizenship issue right there. My dad at the time had a green card. I had a Canadian passport. He holed up in a hotel in Alaska trying to arrange to get the passports. My younger sister was born in the US. Her passport had expired. He managed to get somebody on Scandinavian Airlines to get him onto the plane. But they, and he was working with an attorney on this, and he told the guy told him they're gonna stop you at Arlanda in Stockholm and send you right back to the waiting arms of the FBI because this was a kidnapping. This is a real kidnapping, wow. But it was pre-cell phone and everything. So my dad kind of smooth talked the border agent, put my younger sister's passport on the bottom. You got the Swedish, you got the Canadian. He's telling me this story. The guy looked at it, stamped it, and we were through. We got through. Wow. He separated us with 3 sets of aunts and uncles and went back to Alaska to earn the money to pay for the international court battle. So I was separated from both parents and my sisters for 2 years.
Oh my God.
Because of essentially, similar circumstances to what's happening on the border every day. Somebody's got a kid, divorce, whatever. Some of this stuff is exactly like that. I can speak from the inside. After 2 years, they ordered my dad to come live with us, and he set up a household with a nanny and the kids. And the reason he hadn't remarried is because of religious beliefs. He felt he was still bound to his first wife, who had divorced him. So he wasn't free to remarry, right? It gets to the Supreme Court in Sweden after 2.5 years. And now my mother shows up with a guy she met in a bar in a sham marriage, because the reason he did it in the first place was she was an alcoholic. And she convinced the court to give her custody. So she gets us on a plane back to Canada, but she's so drunk coming down the tarmac into the waiting media to tell the story of Mother Bear winning back her bear cubs that she couldn't get down to the tarmac, and she was belligerent. They shoved her in a car, but that didn't stop the newspapers from telling the story about this happy reunion. You follow me? Which was anything but.
Wow.
So this is all true and real. What I'm telling you is that from the inside, yeah, we need, and I'm sure they've changed some law somewhere because of us, because it went to the Supreme Court of Sweden before it was settled. So yeah, it's messy and it's ugly. My point in telling this story is don't assume, because I would sign up for, law and order on the border, don't assume that I don't have a heart
Hmm.
for the people involved. And that's the tragedy. I agree that the heart of many people on the liberal side of this is in the right place, but their common sense, the facts, reality itself is all distorted. And the worst thing is that they call anyone with a different opinion a racist, or something of the equivalent. Now, not to say that accusations aren't slung from the other side as well, but it's that labeling and that shaming and blaming and that assumption of evil intent or some kind of sinister, vile moral stance that is just typically absent in the other
Yeah.
side.
And it's similar, you said the tragedy of it is kind of that like they're maybe the left's hard on an issue like that's in the right place. Um, the other tragedy to me is that the way of handling people that they disagree with, like the name calling or accusations of racism or whatever, it's like the perfect way to ensure that they shut down and never come to your side or change their views in any way. I think as a political observer, something I've noticed, especially in the last 10 years, is that conservatives are just way better at recruiting, at like bringing people to their worldview. And I think a lot of conservatives who hold like conservative beliefs would say,
In recent years, right? But the pendulum
yeah,
has swung on that.
that's what I say. Yeah. In the last 10
Yeah.
years, I mean, I
Yeah.
really like it's a new phenomenon, but I think like part of it is that conservatives were in the cultural minority for a long time. And so they had to defend their views more often. And they, like iron sharpens iron, they became really good at like talking about why they believe the things they believe, where a lot of liberals just sort of believe the things they believe because everybody believes them and they never really had their views tested. And that became really apparent in the last 10 years. But also, I just think there's a kind of purity politics on the left. I tell a story where in the span of like a week during I think it was the 2020, the lead up to the 2020 election, I was, I used Twitter and I was, or X now. And I had tweeted something about, how Donald Trump was like a master of the media and he was so good at getting attention. And then I criticized the sort of policy prescription that he had, that he was drawing a bunch of attention to. I can't even remember what the issue was. And the replies to my tweet were just all these people saying like, you understand, like Trump's a genius. Welcome, come, like MAGA, put your hat on. You're one of us, like even though I was criticizing something that he had said, it was like the fact that I acknowledged how good he was, how smart he was with the media and how well he worked over journalists and got attention. People were just like, his supporters were like, beautiful, come with us. And then like a week later, I was saying something about Elizabeth Warren, Senator Elizabeth Warren. And in my tweet, I literally said, I think Elizabeth Warren has the right idea about this like housing policy and more people on the right should be considering it. And the responses to the post were people on the left pissed off at me because I called her Elizabeth Warren without calling her Senator Elizabeth Warren. And I was complimenting whatever, and I was just thinking, God, you got like, this is, like you guys have just gotten so bad. Like you make me not want to be on your team, even though I'm just saying this like super lefty senator has a good idea about an important policy. And all you can see is that I didn't, they just accusing me of being a sexist for not calling her Senator Elizabeth Warren. When I go criticize Trump and the criticism of him draws his supporters in to tell me, yes, you're one of us. And that's sort of the dynamic that we've been living in for a while. And I think there's just like there's a real big tent attitude that the right has started to adopt in ways that the left still hasn't in this modern political moment. that's interesting, and it's changing our politics, I think, really quickly. So yeah, I see and experience some of that stuff that it sounds like you've experienced too. And you're right. The right does it too. It's not, of course, I'm not the right demonizes people on the left all the time. And it's equally as destructive and counterproductive. And I wish it would stop, but it's
But it
seemingly getting
sounds,
more common.
yeah, it sounds like that the whole point of Tangle, though, is to, I like to talk about the razor's edge. You have to walk the razor's edge between these, viewpoints. But somebody else says, no, it's not a razor's edge. It's a broad highway. We just need to invite more people to it.
Yeah.
And I think both of those are kind of true, but Tangle's definitely taking the broad highway approach, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, our North Star is that we're a big tent media organization. Everybody's invited. We want people of all political backgrounds to be reading our content. We want to be a meeting place for people of all political backgrounds to engage with each other. And like sometimes I think we're doing a really good job of that. Other times I think we struggle, like I've noticed in our inbox when people reply to some of our newsletters and emails we sent, a lot of the replies have a more conservative bent. I think a lot of conservative readers like writing in privately and one-on-one engagement. And in the comments section of some of our articles, it seems like there's more liberal readers who are interacting there. And so, I'm thinking about ways to try and bridge that gap to get those people interacting with each other more. Because I think I'm not trying to get everybody to hold hands and sing kumbaya and say like, we all agree and we love each other. It's not the point. It's that like we understand and respect where each other are coming from, and we figure out a way to live with that friction, and we can disagree, but do it in a way that, doesn't end in political violence like we've seen, or doesn't end in the sort of maximalist, sensational, scary, the world's burning, the country's going to civil war kind of rhetoric. I think we can do a lot better than we're doing right now.
Yep. Well, we're going to go to a quick commercial break. And then when we come back, we're going to interact with a couple of the audience comments and wrap this up because the time's really flying by. It's fascinating. And I really thank you for being here. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Isaac Saul. That's Ken Tingley. He was the editor of the New York Post-Star, which was a Pulitzer Prize-winning newspaper out in New York, and lamenting about how those small newspapers have gone the way of history. But now we have Tangle at least. So let's take a look at some of these comments. I don't know if there's any of them that jump out at you. I will just jump in on a couple of them here. This one, there's a lot of hurdles to restoring credibility to the media. Wondering what you think the best approach is.
Yeah, great question. I mean, we do a few things at Tangle. First of all, I'll say this. I think the legacy media and the corporate media have a huge hill to climb. I mean, I think it'll take a generation. If CNN started today an effort to win back conservative right-wing readers, or Fox News started today an effort to win back liberal audiences, it would take a generation for that to work. So I think they're in trouble, which is fine because it's an opening for places like us in my view, my biased perspective. But I can tell you stuff that we do, just like a short list of things that we do that I think really helps. First of all, we answer reader audience questions every day in the newsletter and our podcast. We publish reader audience criticisms of our work almost every day. And oftentimes, maybe once every 4 or 5, 6 weeks, we publish entire editions that we send our whole mailing list that is just reader criticism, just people talking about why we messed up or what we're wrong about. And we make them part of the conversation because we recognize that like we're not the voice of God. We don't speak the only sole truth. We have, a lot of people who are really smart and follow our work and have really constructive criticism, and we share it. We correct, if we make a mistake, we issue a correction at the top, not at the bottom in a small footnote. We make it a big thing. We make it very clear when we screwed up. And we also count our corrections.
Unlike certain news outlets that will remain nameless right now.
Yeah, unlike many news outlets. Yeah. So we do things like that. We lean into transparency and being human and owning our mistakes and involving our readership and our audience. And I think that really helps people trust us. And it's not that hard actually to do. It takes a little bit of bravery, but it's not complicated. I think any news organization could do those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, it is really hard to do on a personal level in the moment, right? Because I remember I had a guest on recently and talking about media literacy, and I brought up Solomon, right? There's a proverb from Solomon in the Bible where, whoever brings the story first is the one who's believed, right?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, advocating, you really have to get both sides. And he jumped on that and said, yeah, media literacy is, you should go and first, talk to somebody who believes the opposite, right? And hear them out. You may not agree with them, but hear them out. So you at least know why they're feeling that way. And then a couple of moments later, I kind of tried to do that with him. and he couldn't do it, right? He had to jump in and like cut me off. And I said, wait a minute, didn't you just say?
Right? Yeah.
So it's hard to do in the moment, but I think, if you set it as your editorial policy, maybe it's easier to catch yourself a little bit. And you also are inviting the public, you're making it your public stance.
Yeah. I mean, we in every edition that we publish, we're sharing a wide range of views. And so the actual practice, the format sort of ensures that happens in our process. And if we publish a standalone piece, which we will do sometimes, we'll publish, a piece that's advancing an argument. Oftentimes the next week we'll publish a response to that piece, or, even in the same day, sometimes we'll publish like here's one side of this argument. That we're doing that this week, actually on Friday. We have one interview coming out with somebody who believes that Russia is fully responsible for the war in Ukraine, and we're sharing that interview. And then 30 minutes later, we're going to share an interview with somebody who thinks that NATO and Ukraine and the United States bear a lot of the blame for the war and provoked Russia. And we're just going to put those opinions out there and let people make their minds up, which I think is a good way to do it.
Well, I want to make a quick comment about that. And then I'm going to go to this little chain of comments about fear. But I was actually living in Germany for 10 years. I studied Russian. I did work behind the Iron Curtain. I was literally coming into from Finland on my way to St. Petersburg when the tanks were coming from Moscow to St. Petersburg during the Gorbachev abduction. It was just an amazing moment.
Wow.
So I also had a visa to go into Ukraine right before I left. It never happened because I was brought back to the US. People used to think I worked for the CIA, by the way. But anyway, the point is, I remember very clearly that when the Soviet Union collapsed, because I was studying Russian, working. What I did was in Poland in 1985. I'm an old guy, and I'm older than I look. But in 1985, I actually brought a group of 180 people into worship in Poland behind the Iron Curtain, with the tacit permission from the government, Pol Orbis, the tourist agency, because they wanted the Western valuta. It was illegal. Religion was suppressed. And we literally had people like coming from East Germany to worship with us in Czechoslovakia. People from Czechoslovakia had to get a visa to go to Poland because the natives in Czechoslovakia couldn't worship with us. But the East Germans could come in and worship with us, and the Czechs could worship with us in Poland. So this is why I was studying Russian and doing this stuff. But anyway, So I knew what was going on. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, Ukraine was the third largest nuclear power on the planet. And there was an agreement made between three superpowers, well, two superpowers and a wannabe has-been superpower, to protect Ukraine in exchange for giving up their nuclear weapons. The three signatories were Russia, America, and Great Britain, that gave Ukraine a commitment: give up your nukes and we will protect your sovereignty. People don't remember this. People don't know this. It's a big deal. And that was not honored long before this war. Under previous president, in Crimea, this was not
Obama. Honored. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
I'm not going to say the name. I'm very, very carefully not politically partisan, but the facts of the matter are, yeah, that's who didn't honor it, right? That's who also invited Russia in to the Middle East, right? During the JCPOA, right? Russia was invited in to solve the weapons of mass destruction problem in Syria. And they brought in their anti-aircraft batteries, which had one purpose only, and that's to make any Air Force in the area stand down, because the JCPOA in the fine print had towards the back had provisions that should anyone attack Iran's nuclear capabilities over the course of this agreement that would allow them to get nuclear weapons, then America would have to come in on the side of Iran to protect them from any such attack while they were in the JCPOA. Again, people don't know any of this reality. This is the geopolitical reality in the history. Those who don't learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat it. It has been said, right? Anyway, that's an aside. I just felt like I had to throw that out there because I was personally aware of all this, being in Europe at that time when the Soviet Union collapsed and Ukraine regained its full sovereignty, right? So I don't know if you have any comments on that. Feel free to jump in. Otherwise, we'll just jump to these comments on fear.
I mean, I have strong personal views about the fact that, in my view, Putin is very clearly the person in control of whether the war stops or goes on, and maximum pressure on him, in my opinion, is a good thing. I have family in Ukraine, so it cuts close to home for sure. And, there's a country of 40 million people who want to live freely and elect their own leaders, and they were invaded. And I think that's a problem. So, it is. But like, to your point, there is so much deep history there that's kind of been memory hold, and our commitment notwithstanding. I mean, certainly an important part of it.
Yep. And my point is, it's not just something that's happening now. There is that deep history, right? So we were talking about fear some time ago, and Boo Time, it's wild how fear sells. We rarely stop to ask what it's doing to the public trust. And then Emily responded, it's ruining it. But fear is a business model overall. Someone came in and praised Tangle, going back to fear being the hook. Truth becomes the casualty, said Gina. That's why outlets like Tangle matter. Tangle is awesome. So you got a fan there. But this is where I wanted to go with this. Do you think audiences, because you and I were talking about this before the show started.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Audiences are partly complicit, that we want to feel outrage or fear because it gives a sense of certainty or belonging?
Yeah. Great question, Chloe. And as Wade said, this was actually something I was just bending his ear about before we came on the show, which is a view that I have here that, I think the people watching this, audience, news consumers more broadly, should take more ownership over the power that you have, the responsibility that you have. I have friends who complain to me about the media. I'm responsible for everything every journalist and media organization does because they know me. So I get blamed for everything. So, they'll say stuff to me like, why does the New York Times cover every, sex scandal in Donald Trump's life and all his marriage troubles? And they have 5 articles about that on the homepage. And My response is because you click on it. Every time that you are navigating the internet, which is how most people consume their news these days, if you click on a news article or you give a view to a video or you sit down and watch 20 minutes of something on YouTube, you're sending a signal to those news organizations, A, that you want more of that, and B, that they can monetize this kind of content. So, I as I navigate the space, I think of every click like $1. If I click an article in the New York Times, I just gave them $1 for publishing it. They probably made something like that. Maybe it's 10 cents, but the the reality of it is that you're sending a signal to them about what you value, and you're also sending a signal to them about what kinds of content they can make money off of. And every news organization has to, balance that and think about the ways in which, they have to do the things their audience wants to drive revenue and eyeballs and traffic and whatever, and do the things that they should do. But as news consumers, we have an incredible amount of power and influence, especially in large numbers. And I think that's one of the things that I find a little bit frustrating about, a lot of the media criticism. And I think, Chloe, like your point is, we are complicit. The audiences are complicit. We reward the fear. If you go to the homepage of a news organization's website and there's an article about a new healthcare policy that's going to reduce the cost of healthcare for 20 million Americans, and it's like a wonky story about how the legislation came to be, and then right next to it there's a story about 20 children dying in a bus crash, you're going to click the story about the bus crash. Most people do. But when you do that, you're rewarding the kind of, if it bleeds, it leads mentality, or the fear or the outrage. And so I think people should be really cognizant of that and think deeply about how they operate as news consumers, because you can send strong signals out there, which helps.
So follow-on question to that as we wrap this up and crash land this plane.
Yeah. First of all, yes, certainly being member funded creates certain pressures. I have tried to inoculate ourselves to these pressures in a couple ways. One is just being really aware of what the phenomenon is, most commonly called audience capture. It's the idea that, like, you publish something your audience likes, so you keep publishing the thing your audience likes. You feed them what they want, and now you've been captured by the audience. And then when you diverge from that, they get upset, and then you're forced back into that. We, as a news organization, have a really intentional decision-making process about what stories we're going to cover and why. And generally speaking, what we do is we go toward the debates. So we're sort of like out at sea, and the tide kind of takes us in the direction that the dialogue's happening. So in a lot of ways, we don't get to choose the way traditional news organizations might get to choose, because we just have to wade into the really difficult, messy stuff, and we do it over and over and over again. And that's one of the big reasons why we lose a lot of readers. We're growing, which is awesome because our pitch is so good and I think so many people want us. But to be totally honest, like, a lot of people unsubscribe because they get pissed off about a story we cover, or they're upset that we didn't take the angle that they wanted us to take, which, it's frustrating. It's like the whole point is that we're not doing that. But it's the reality of doing the work. And at this point, we're big enough and we have a good enough business model that I don't feel a lot of pressure to do what the audience wants to do. And trust me, I make them very angry a lot, and I make them really happy a lot too. But that's part of the experience of, I think, consuming the news that we produce, is like, you're going to have to confront stuff that you don't like. And it's good for your brain. I think we need to do that more often.
Wonderful. Well, we've filled up the time already. Isaac, anything you want to leave the audience with before I jump into the sneak peek on who's going to be?
Look, I would say in your personal lives, if you want to be a part of the solution, saw one of your audience members ask that. I think the best thing you can do is, find somebody who disagrees with you politically in real life. family member, neighbor, friend, and just spend time talking with them, break bread, share a beer, have a coffee, whatever it is. The in-person dialogue with an open mind where you ask questions and you actually try and listen to what they say, doing that at scale as individuals, I think would do a great deal of good. And yeah, if you are interested or like anything you've heard, please go to readtangle.com and check out our website, sign up for our newsletter and give it a shot, because you'll probably like it.
Wonderful. It's been just a pleasure having you here. I've learned a lot, really been engaging. I hope we can find a reason to have you back on here soon. We'll all be following you to see if you're, going to be the next editor-in-chief of some major news station as your organization gets bought out. But in the meantime, keep up the great work you're doing to take that razor's edge, widen it out a little bit, help more people, move out of the left ditch, out of the right ditch, whether it's an inch or 100 yards or 10 miles towards the center of the road, so that they can at least hear and have a dialogue with people coming at it from the other direction.
Thanks, Wade. I appreciate you having me on.
It's been a pleasure. Everyone else, stay tuned. We're going to air the sneak peek for next week's show. And meanwhile, remember, you are created in the image of God, and God loves his creation. We'll see you next week. Hey everyone, it's Wade Franson back with another sneak peek for Created in the Image of God. I have a guest that I've been so looking forward to interviewing on the show. His name is Mark Oppenheimer. He says that he likes his religion somewhat traditional. He's Jewish here in America. And on the political sphere, he might be somewhat more left of center. His work, as he described it to me in our brief preparation for this interview, is he likes to objectively report on things, obviously to help people form their own opinions, but he sometimes offers his own as well. So he's an interesting mix of what America needs more of, in my opinion, right now. Welcome to the studio, Mark.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, we always like to let our guests know a little bit about who it is that we're interviewing. So how would you describe your upbringing and background?
I'm a New Englander. I was raised in Springfield, Massachusetts, the eldest of 4 children, 2 Jewish parents, very different kinds of Judaism. My father was from the what is called classical Reform tradition that was created by German and Central European immigrants in America. My mother's parents were both from Orthodox backgrounds, but had become communists, so very aggressively secular in their outlook. And so I sometimes joke that I was uniquely bred to be indifferent to religious observance, but somehow it didn't work out that way. And then I went to college and ended up doing a PhD in religious studies, but never with the idea of being a scholar. Always much more interested in going into reporting and bringing religion and religious news to a broader public rather than staying in academia. So, and fortunately, it all worked out.
Well, I'm excited to interview you because my audience knows I'm serially putting out a series of articles, writing a book on the role of religion in civilization building throughout history. It's a sort of a, for dummies, right? I'm no scholar either, but looking back, starting with Adam, Abraham, Noah, what did these people contribute, and then Moses, of course, and Jesus, but also Muhammad, Buddha, civilization's rise, Göbekli Tepe taught us this, that, first came that temple that you're probably familiar with this, and the religious idea, and civilization arose from the idea of religion. So this mix that you probably got from your parents, how do you incorporate this view in your reporting and writing?
Well, I come from a tradition, Judaism, that has a lot of room for argument. That's in fact, a sacred gesture in the religion. So the halls of study, the Batei Midrash, the Beit Midrashes, are places where people pair up in what are called chavrusas, which is partners. You learn together 2 at a time, and you sit over a text and you argue over it, and you share competing observations. And the text itself are often books of the Talmud, which is a record of disputations among rabbis fighting over how to interpret things and arriving at conclusions. I mean, it's literally a record of arguments. So we are truly the anti-literalist, anti-fundamentalist religion. Argument is totally essential. Contesting is totally essential. So that's in the tradition. My parents were both very much that way. You know, nothing was ever handed to us as dogma. You know, in anything, in religion, in politics, in life, you know, we were encouraged to argue with them. Not that they didn't have this final say in their household when we were growing up, but there was certainly no because I said so. I mean, it was always, you know, you explain stuff, you talk about stuff, you quarrel about stuff. And then I entered into, you know, a guild of journalists where part of the job is to always be seeking different points of view. So, so I think that in a lot of ways, starting with my religious heritage, I'm inclined towards skepticism, argument, disputation. The other thing that I would say Judaism and the Abrahamic faiths give us specifically, which I think is very much in my intellectual DNA, is a kind of anti-relativism. I mean, remember that it's Torah, it's the Old Testament that says, you know, there's one God, not multiple gods. You have to worship this one God, and anything else is idol worship. And so they were saying to a world of people that was organized by warring tribes, each of whom had their own local divinities, their own local icons. They were saying, actually, that doesn't work. Your icons are not as good as ours. In fact, they're idols. There's one God. And what that means, of course, is that there's one set of ethics. So it means that if rape is wrong in this town, it's wrong in this town. If stealing is wrong in this town, it's wrong across the valley 20 miles away. That's really, really important. I mean, that's how you end up with meaningful systems of justice. That's how you end up with a Rawlsian idea like justice as fairness, is that you say there's whether you want to say one God or one morality or one set of rules, the idea that it not only can apply to everyone, but has to apply to everyone is really essential to, you know, to civilization.
So the idea of a true north, right? But people coming at it from the north, south, east, west will have different perspectives and views. There's maybe a thesis and an antithesis, and it's up to each person to form their own synthesis in light of understanding that there is a true north. Is that
right,
fair?
And more, yeah, absolutely. And more than that, I mean, Judaism teaches that we do not teach that everyone should be Jewish. In fact, there was a specific covenant with a specific group, with a family, with one family, and it's a permeable family. It's a family that you can marry into and be adopted into. It's not just bloodlines, but it nevertheless, it is a family, a kinship network, and they are supposed to have Jewish practices, but Gentiles are not supposed to have Jewish practices. They're supposed to have the practices of whatever their communities are.
But even there, you have the Noahide covenant, right? And the righteous among the nations. So there was a full standard for all people, and then the Jews had specific requirements that were not applied to everybody else.
Yeah, and by the count of Maimonides, the medieval, you know, Iberian sage, there are 613 mitzvot or commandments that apply to Jews. Many of which are not practicable without the temple. I mean, unless and until a temple gets rebuilt, there's several hundred of them that are irrelevant. But there are still, you know, a couple hundred that are relevant and apply to Jews, and some apply according to Orthodoxy to Jewish men, and others to all Jews, but to Jews. And then there are 7 Noahide laws that apply to everybody. You know, do not, you know, honor thy father and mother, and do not kill, and things like that. So.
And is blood also that you shouldn't be eating blood? Is that one of the Noahide laws?
Yeah, the dietary laws are not among the Noahide laws, I don't think.
Okay.
So
we'll research it before the show.
Yeah.
I'm gonna crash land this plane now, but but everyone needs to tune in, because what we're seeing here.
We're gonna keep going.
This is the sneak peek, short one. So what we're seeing here, folks, is that you can't really truly understand the modern world and some of the issues and challenges that we're having on the face of this planet right now. Some of the top issues can be much better understood by taking a little bit of what Mark has, which is that deep study into religion and its role in society. So Mark, I could not be more excited about spending a whole hour with you in front of a live audience on October 1st.
No,
anything you want to add? Because I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you said October 1st. That's wrong. It's October 21st.
October 21st. Thank you for correcting me. See, no, we're not going to argue about that. We're going to settle on October 21st.
I have nothing to add. It'll be great. It'll be great fun.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. See you there.